you all sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Thomas Telford is one of my Masonic heroes. He was a hero of mine long before I realised he was a Freemason, because for many years I lived in Manchester, and my lady friend, who later became my wife, lived in Mould, my family originally being from Mould. And I used to travel down to Wales very regularly, and I used to travel along Thomas Telford's A5. And it is a wonderful and beautiful road. In particular, when we went out together to Anglesey, we used to go across a magnificent bridge across the Menai Straits, the Menai Bridge. And Thomas Telford built that. In recent years, I've got more interested in him, because he did a number of quite innovative things. He invented the suspension bridge, and he also developed the Institute of Civil Engineering. What inspired a simple Scottish mason, born in poverty, forced to herd sheep after school to earn coppers, become the founder of the Institution of Civil Engineers? Let me tell you his tale. He's one of our most successful civil engineers. He built the Caledonian Canal, he built most of the A road system. Probably his most magnificent achievement is the A5, running from London to Holyhead, with a view of being able to facilitate the travel of the Irish MPs from Parliament to Dublin. He built canals, he built aqueducts, he built roads, and he solved the way of getting across rivers in more than one innovative way. He also turned civil engineering into a legitimate profession. He set up a system for training and teaching young engineers the elements of their trade. That story is quite well known. What's less well known is the extent of his Masonic activity and the inspiration that he drew from it. And that's what I want to tell you a little bit about tonight. He was born the 9th of August 1797, just north of Dumfries, a little village called Glendinning. And he was on the estate of the 3rd Duke of Buccleuch. Now, the 2nd Duke of Buccleuch, who was the grandfather of the 3rd Duke, had been Grand Master Mason of the Ancients Lodge. So he was born on the estate of a Freemason. The 3rd never became a Grand Master, but he was a Freemason. His father, John Telford, was a shepherd, but he died literally 2 months after Thomas was born. So Thomas was brought up by his mother Janet. That's a drawing he did of Hermitage Castle in Lidderdale, which was one of the places he played as a child. He published an autobiography in his old age, and he illustrated it himself. That's where he went to school. He attended the parish school in Westerkirk, but he had to work. His mother couldn't afford to put him through school and keep him, so he ended up herding cattle and sheep out of school hours. So he learnt from a very early age that if he wanted to get anywhere, he needed to work hard. He was initially apprenticed to a stonemason in Lochmaben. That stonemason was not a particularly good master. He was rather harsh with him, and Thomas ran away. But his cousin Thomas Jackson persuaded the master mason who built that bridge originally, a guy called Andrew Thompson, that's the Langham Bridge, to take him on. And he thrived from there on. That, incidentally, is Thomas Telford's mark. It's 2 arrows linked by a line with a cross. He really took to stonemasonry. And he then set up a business with 2 fellow masons, Andrew Thompson and Matthew Davidson, and they were employed by the Duke of Buccleuch, there he is, to work on the refurbishment of the farmhouses and estate buildings. And he prospered. He was a good workman, he could shape a good stone, he could make a good wall. At the age of 23 years, he was given a recommendation by the Duke of Buccleuch to go to Edinburgh with a letter of introduction to Brother Robert Adam, Robert Adam was a member of Lodge Canongate Kilwinning No. 2, and he worked for Adam for 18 months. Adam was initiated into Canongate Kilwinning on the 29th of November 1752, and he was a famous architect in Edinburgh. And he trained Thomas in the basis skills of architecture. Through Brother Adam, Thomas met this gentleman. That's William Johnson, who married rather well, and he became the Earl of Pulteney, and then Earl of Bath, and the MP for Shrewsbury, and he played a tremendous role in Thomas's later career. But soon after meeting him, Thomas moved down to London. Again, on the recommendation of Adam, he took Telford down to London to work on this building. That's Somerset House. In his autobiography, Telford described Adam as very affable and communicative. Seemed to have taken Thomas under his wing. He helped him. He put him on to some good jobs. That was a plum job in the day, and Thomas Telford helped shape some of the stones on that facade. At the age of 26, Adam arranged to pass him on to another great project that was being done under the auspices of Samuel Wyatt, and that was the Customs Commissioner's house in Portsmouth Dockyard. Samuel Wyatt did the architecture. Thomas Telford supervised the masonry and the building work. He was getting a really good grounding in building magnificent structures. Now let's start on his Masonic career. He joined the Lodge of Antiquity, No. 8, on the 17th of December 1784, and it used to meet at a pub called the Tun in Portsmouth. It was raised in 1838. Now, he is recorded in the minutes of that lodge as a joining member. This means that he had to be a Mason beforehand, so where had he been made a Mason? Unfortunately, the minutes don't tell us. But there are certain clues we can look at. I would suggest to you that the most likely lodge was Canongate Kilwinning No. 2, but there's no record in Canongate Kilwinning's archives of Thomas Telford joining. But at that period, in the 18th century, in the late 1700s, there was a tradition that when a Mason was made, the details would be sent to the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and it would be recorded there, but you had to send along with it a shilling, and a shilling was an awful lot of money. There was a temptation to give the brother who was made the Mason his certificate, ignore sending a record to Grand Lodge, and pocket the shilling. And lots of lodges did this. Now, there are two prime examples of this where detail turned up later. James Watt was initiated into a Glasgow lodge, had a certificate amongst his own papers, no record in Grand Lodge. And George Stevenson was also made a Mason in Perth, and no record in the archives of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, but a record in the Institute of Mechanical Engineers he founded. This was going on quite a lot. There were many instances of lodges initiating new Masons, but overlooking the need to register them with Grand Lodge, which of course meant they didn't need to pay the shilling fee. That's not a suggestion, Brother Secretary. It's just a comment. Generally, it was lodges that were under financial pressure that did this, and effectively it was a way of transferring the financial pressure from themselves onto Grand Lodge. I don't think they omitted to charge the members the shilling registration fee. They just omitted to pass it on. We have two clues to why Robert Adam was his patron, probably his proposer. That is, Telford knew the story of William Sinclair of Roslin. He writes about him saying James II of Scotland appointed one of Sinclair's ancestors Grand Master of the Fraternity of Freemasons. That was a piece of knowledge that would not have been known outside the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and very few lodges within Scotland knew about it. The only lodge which had a detailed knowledge of it was Lodge Canongate Kilwinning, because it was Lodge Canongate Kilwinning which, when there was a move to make Lord Crawford Provincial Grand Master of Scotland, Canongate Kilwinning immediately initiated, passed and raised William Sinclair of Roslin on the grounds he was their hereditary Grand Master, even though He was a member of the very Jacobite organisation, the Edinburgh Company of Archers, who kept a special fund to buy weapons for the restoration of the King over the Water. A little bit dodgy. It was Canongate Kilwinning who brought him through. He was promptly proclaimed Grand Master of the new Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1736 and signed away his family's hereditary rights, which had never existed in the first place. That story was not widely known, but it was known in Canongate Kilwinning, and Telford knew it. Telford quotes that story with great pride and a great deal of detail in his autobiography. He was sent with a letter of introduction to Robert Adam, who was a past master of Lodge Canongate Kilwinning, and he knew the law that was only known within that lodge at the time. So I would suggest to you there's a very good chance that it was Canongate Kilwinning who pocketed the shilling and passed back the certificate to Thomas Telford, but unfortunately it's got lost. Now, he developed his Masonic career quite quickly because he became fascinated by Freemasonry. He was particularly interested in the layout and design of Masonic temples, and he founded a new lodge called Phoenix 484 on the 20th of May 1788. He was 29 years old at this stage, and he writes at great length that he had designed this. He says, "I'm taking great delight in Freemasonry, and I'm about to have a lodge room at the George Hotel fitted up to my own plans and under my direction." And that was for Phoenix Lodge. That again is one of Telford's sketches of the George Hotel where Phoenix Lodge met. His friend William Pulteney had become MP for Shrewsbury, and he was interested in the state of the canals and the roads in Shropshire. In particular, he was interested in the Shropshire Union Canal, which was mooted and not built. He appointed Telford Surveyor of Public Works for Shropshire. Telford moved to Shrewsbury, and he visited the newly formed Salopian Lodge for its second meeting. At the third meeting, he became a joining member, and he remained a member of that lodge for the rest of his life. That's Salopian Lodge 268, which still exists. He's obviously been a keen Mason, but he also met an interesting brother in Salopian Lodge. In fact, he was involved in his initiation. He took part in the initiation of this gentleman. That's William Hazeldine. William Hazeldine was a Shropshire ironmaster. He knew the secrets of making wrought iron, of making cast iron, of making iron structures of various shapes and sizes. And he had the foundries and the skilled craftsmen to do it. Telford needed to get the Shropshire Union Canal across the gorge of the River Dee. That is a difficult task. The way he did it was he worked with Hazeldine, and they created a great steel trough and a set of perfect stone arches to support it, and carried the canal right across the Dee Gorge. And that is the aqueduct he built. It's still there. Look at the height of it. It's an awesome thing to walk across. You find yourself holding on to the rail. It's so high up, and there's that little narrow walkway. And if you go across it in a boat, it's even worse, because there's nothing on the other side. I mean, you can't really ride the boat out of it at the speed you're going, but you look down and you think, there's nothing under this boat. And you can see there's not a lot of spare room when you've got a boat on there. That is the combined work of brothers Hazeldine and Telford. It's the Pontysilty aqueduct over the River Dee. It's got an ironwork trough and supports made by Hazeldine, and it's carried on the enormous masonry pillars that he set in the valley below. And they carried the canal right over the Dee Gorge. Telford became responsible for the construction of the whole of the A5 from London right the way to Holyhead. And it was a fairly easy job up as far as the Welsh borders. But when you get further into Wales, you find there are lots of hills, there are lots of rivers, and there are very few roads through there. There was one Roman road which meandered around along the coast, but you still had to cross the River Conwy. Telford decided to cross the River Conwy at Betws y Coed, and there is the Waterloo Memorial Bridge that he built for it. It's a Catenian arch made from steel based on stone pillars. So he was learning an awful lot about how to use steel. He was working very closely with Hazeldine. There was a problem about getting across the Menai Straits. That was the first bridge he put across the Conway. He built another one in the town of Conway itself, which is where it's much wider, and that was a test for what he finally did over the Menai Straits. But John Rennie, who was also a Freemason, had put forward a plan for a 2-bridge arch to cross the Menai Straits. Put a pillar in the centre, put 2 steel arches similar to these on pillars, one on each side, at the narrowest point at the Isle of Pigs in Ismockin. When they costed it out, it was far too expensive to take it across, and the Admiralty objected to it, because you couldn't sail a full man of war underneath it, because you had to have the man of war in the centre channel, and if you put a pillar in the centre channel, the boat would run into it. So they objected to it. The problem was, could you make it with a single arch? Well, Telford reckoned you could, but it was incredibly expensive. So it was thrown out. We had the problem, how was he going to get the mail coaches across the Menai Straits onto Anglesey so that they could be taken on to Holyhead? He proposed a totally innovative idea, a flat-bedded bridge which would hang from an inverted Catenian arch strung across the straits. Now, how many of you are Royal Arch Masons? Quick show of hands. The rest of you will not understand what I'm about to share with my companions of the Royal Arch. There is in the lecture of the furniture of the lodge instruction on how to create a Catenian arch. You take either a sogenous cord or a chain and you dangle it from 2 points and you let it fall under gravity. And you then transfer that shape onto a wooden former which you invert to create the arch. That's the source of it. The idea of using that chain and hanging the bridge from it was a totally novel idea. For those of you who are in the correct degrees, you'll notice he also used 7 arches. He could have used an even number, but he chose not to. This idea came from the Royal Arch. And in 1811, when he came up with it, the Royal Arch was still worked in craft lodges. It would have still been worked in Salopian Lodge. So he would have worked the ritual of the furniture of the lodge. He would have known about the chain. He would have known how the cord was used to create that shape. So both he and Hazeldine would have been aware of that piece of ritual. There's the actual words. The form of the chapter is a Catenian arch being the inverse shape of a chain which is freely suspended between 2 points. It's the actual words of the ritual that we use in the furniture of the lodge. Those of you who aren't Royal Arch Masons, will you please line up by the door and Brother Moroni will kill you with his sword. That's the first idea. The idea of hanging chains from pillars to hold a flatbed road. It got rid of the problem of sailing a ship underneath it, because there's nothing underneath it. There's the main support pillars. There's the arches supporting the roadway to the pillars. And there is the Catenian arch. But it's more than just a simple Catenian arch. He's drawn another inspiration from Freemasonry in this. If you look at it, there are 2 chains. Do you see? That chain and that chain. And when you look at how they are connected, you're reminded of another piece of ritual. Telford knew something about chains that he'd learnt from initiating an entered apprentice. Do you work the apprentice chain in St James's? Have you seen it worked? Yes. So you know it's a double link chain. You don't hold the hands of the brother next to you, you reach out across the chest to a brother on the far side. So it's a double link chain. So that should a brother pass away, the chain isn't broken, only weakened, and then strengthened by the occlusion of the new initiate. He's seen that ritual worked. He knew that a double link chain was stronger, so he incorporated it. If you look, that chain is supporting those, the other chain is supporting those. It's a double linked entered apprentice chain that supports the roadway. So he's drawn on whatever trials and difficulties it faced, it was strong enough because of the double linking to ensure that it would remain firm and unbroken when it was tested. So he'd drawn inspiration for this wonderful engineering invention from The lecture of the furniture of the Royal Arch and the double link chain worked when you initiate an apprentice. Menai's suspension bridge was a totally new idea, but it came from an ancient source of inspiration. Telford and Hazeldean both knew that ritual, but they also had the vision to see that ritual being worked when the lodge was opened as a chapter and when it was initiating apprentices, and to apply it to the problem of creating a flatbed bridge across the Menai Straits. And it's been there for the best part of 200 years. Still standing, still working, still carrying buses across it. So they do have to pull the wing mirrors in to get through the arches, because it was designed for a stagecoach. The chains have been replaced in the 1930s, but if you go to Conwy, he built a smaller version of it to test the idea, and that's still got the original chains on it, and they're formed in just the same way that those are. He was using the knowledge that's given to Royal Arch companions of how to create a Catenian arch, which is, of course, the strongest of arches when it has a keystone in the top of it. But he also drew other inspiration from the craft. As a Freemason, he was encouraged to make daily steps in extending his Masonic knowledge, and he applied this idea to his apprentices. He met with a young group of engineers and he helped them create an Institute of Civil Engineering. And in 1820, he became the very first president of this fledgling institution of civil engineers. He was able to procure for them a royal charter, and he did it very quickly and very easily because he used both his political, his social, and his Masonic connections. He knew the Duke of Sussex, the first Grand Master of UGLE, and he also knew George IV, most worshipful brother, George IV. He was meeting them in Masonic meetings. He was putting forward the idea of extending the study of the hidden mystery of nature and science to new young engineers, and to set up an institute to do it, and he got a royal charter. This is what he said about it from his own autobiography. Youths of respectability and competent education who contemplate civil engineering as a profession are seldom aware of how far they need to descend in order to establish a basis for their future elevation. Not only are the natural senses of seeing and feeling requisite in the examination of materials, but also the practised eye and the hand, which has experience of the kind and qualities of stone, of lime, of iron, of timber, and even of earth, and the effects of human ingenuity in applying these and combining these substances is necessary for arriving at mastery of the profession. So he basically said, you start as an apprentice, you learn your job, you practice your skills, you learn how to shape and square and polish an ashlar, because if you can't do it, you can't instruct anybody else to do it. You can almost hear the Mason speaking when he said, how can a man give judicial directions unless he possesses personal knowledge of the details requisite to effect his ultimate purpose in the best and cheapest manner? We'd use the term low cost nowadays. He didn't mince words though. He put this craft teaching into practice. When he was announcing that he had achieved a royal charter for the Institute of Civil Engineering, he said, I have carefully perused the rules and orders which have been prepared with much attention, and I think they are now sufficiently matured to be a guide and guard to the conduct and welfare of the institution. Judicious regulations are absolutely necessary in all societies, but I trust that in this the good sense of the members will always prove that manners and moral feeling are superior to written laws and will render my duty as president both easy and pleasant. You can hear the Mason speaking in those words. That's his address to the Institute of Civil Engineers. His two great achievements, that's the Pontysilty Viaduct in the background there, the suspension bridge and creating the profession of civil engineering. Those are his most lasting memorials. And really, what greater memorials to departed merit could you ask than that? But I'm going to leave the last word to Brother Telford himself. I'm going to quote from his autobiography a little poem that he wrote to inspire new engineers. Tell them ambition's wreath and fortune's gain but ill supply the pleasures of the plain. Teach their young hearts thy simple charms to prize, to love their native hills and bless their native skies. Thank you, brethren.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please click the subscribe box in the bottom right hand corner of the screen.